they usually pressure you as an author to say, have your revision done within a certain number of weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, and you're obliged to send that paper back to that journal. But by rejecting you and offering you to resubmit, it's different. What it means is the control is given back to you as an author. So you can take as long as you want to revise your paper. You're under no pressure. And you're under no pressure to submit to IEEE Access. You can choose to send your revised paper anywhere else. So you're let off the hook. So the way to think of this binary decision process is it's a way of giving control back to the author. So the control is in your hands, and the flow and speed of your paper is in fact totally in your hands then. And especially for big journals like this, because we deal with many thousands of papers every year for this one journal, because it's like a mega journal. You don't want your paper to kind of be in a journal, big journal's system for very long, because things can get lost and out of sequence, and it's better that the control is put back in your hand. So that's the way it operates, and that's the way what binary decision is all about. You as an author, you retain copyright. Your papers have free access to the whole world in perpetuity. They're on IEEE Explore. As for all IEEE papers, there's usage data and citation data on IEEE Explore. And reader comments can be added to your paper online, because there's a comment box on the online version. So that's an interesting feature that a number of journals are adopting these days, and IEEE Access is one of the leaders in that. As for all IEEE Access, all IEEE papers, all articles are screened for plagiarism submission. So we have plagiarism detection software, and we detect that. And if an author is found to have been plagiarized, the paper is immediately rejected, and there can be disciplinary action, and involve, say, banning the author from publishing in any IEEE journal for a period of up to 5 years. So the IEEE are pretty strict about that. So I mentioned this to you as authors, not to scare you, but to reassure you that we are maintaining absolute quality, because you as an author want to publish in the best journal that is maintaining quality and not treating plagiarism lightly. So it's in a way supporting you as an author. Okay, some special features. Oh, this is a strange little feature. Because we are open access and there's no paper, no real physical pages, we have no page limit. So that's a new innovation for a journal. The idea of, let me explain this no page limit thing. So the idea of offering a no page limit to authors is, well, I'm an author too, and I know how frustrating it is if I say send a 20-page paper to a journal and they send the paper back to me and say, you got to shorten this, we only want 15 pages. And so now I've got to spend a whole month trying to shorten this paper by 5 pages. And sometimes it takes a long time because it's difficult to reshape a paper to a specific page limit. So by saying no page limit, what we are in effect doing is we're speeding up the author experience of publishing. We're making it faster for you. We're not giving you this extra hurdle of having an exact limit that you must comply to. So, it makes it faster for you. And you're not going to get your paper returned on a page limit basis. However, let me make one thing very clear. Just because we say no page limit is not an open invitation to send us some 200-page paper, which is ridiculous. We don't want that. the idea of the no page limit is you have a paper that is in a normal length somewhere around 20 pages, and we're not going to tell you to reduce or increase by 5 pages or something like that, okay? And also, if you have a review paper, sometimes a review paper does tend to need sometimes to be genuinely a little longer, perhaps 20 to 30 pages or so. Now, if you do have a paper that has lots of extra materials and that does tend to make it bigger than, say, 30 pages, we recommend you keep your paper short, nevertheless, and use what's called the supplementary materials section of the paper. So, and this serves you better as an author because, as you know, studies have been done on this, and it has been found that papers that are too long get cited less. So you as an author are doing yourself a disservice if the paper is too long. So in summary, page limit is not an invitation to make a long paper. It's just a way of not being too strict about the exact pages. Which leads me to my second point about the supplementary material section. If you do have lots of extra material and figures and special things, we encourage you to put that in the section there and keep your paper shorter. We have a wide scope. That's the next point that I already mentioned. So we cover all the IEEE's area of interest. So this is another thing that serves you as an author, because as an author myself, it's very frustrating if I send a paper to a journal and they reject it and say, actually, it's a bit out of scope. And and that is frustrating. So the nice thing about having a wide scope is you're not going to be rejected on those grounds. So especially if you have a multidisciplinary paper that is intersecting a number of areas of IEEE topics, this is a great journal to publish in, because if you go to some of the more traditional IEEE transactions, you could easily be rejected from those because they perceive your paper as not being in scope. This won't happen here in IEEE Access. Another thing we encourage is we don't mind a little bit of controversy. If your article wants to debate some hot topic, something that is kind of not really agreed in the electronic engineering community, some model or theory or idea, you can openly express that in your paper. So there's no problem with that. And we recognize that if a paper is slightly controversial, probably half the reviewers are not going to like that. So we take that into account, and in that case, we do allow in this journal for you to disagree with a reviewer in your reply letter. So provided your debate article is done in a scholarly way, is a researched and scholarly, even if there is a disagreement amongst reviewers, we can still publish it. And if you want to make a disagreement with a reviewer in your review letter, you can do that openly. We would ask, however, you do it in a scholarly way. You give your reasons clearly, you give your evidence, and also you add transparency. And by transparency, what I mean is your counterpoint that you put in your letter should actually appear in the paper itself. It should be worked into the paper so that the evidence you're putting forward to support your controversial point is actually in the paper. If you do that, then you satisfy the requirements. So as we have many thousands of papers, so we need to streamline the reply letter to make it easier for editors. And so we have a reply letter template, which we supply you, which we which would require you to use. So this makes things easier for everyone. So here is a graph showing the accepted articles over the years since 2016. And as you can see, IEEE Access is growing rapidly. This year alone, we have already published over 15,000 papers in this journal alone. So as you can see, it's a very large journal. It's in fact got about 20% of all IEEE's volume in this one journal. So then the next question, well, is it a good journal? Is it making good impact? Well, the impact factor is 3.7, which is pretty respectable for big open access journals. Most big, good open access journals are around impact factor. You'll notice none of them are much, and there's reason for that is because the way impact factor is calculated is it involves dividing by the number of papers you publish. And say for this year, we published 15,000 papers. So you've got this impact factor formula, which then gets divided by 15,000. So you end up with a small number. So the thing about impact measures is they're very one-dimensional things, and they don't necessarily, and one measure does not necessarily characterize a journal very well. And so to understand a journal impact, you have to look really at a number of impact measures, not just one, like impact factor. So if you look on Clarivat, they have another measure called eigenfactor. And in my second line here, on Clarivat's eigenfactor, we are actually ranked number 3 in the world for electrical and electronic engineering. This IEEE Access is number 3. And by Clarivat's eigenfactor, we are actually ranked as the number 1 journal for telecommunications and number 1 journal for computer science. In fact, we are ranked within the top 1.2% of all journals ranked by eigenfactor on Clarivat. How many journals does Clarivat index? They have about 12,000 journals. So we're in the top, around the top 1% of 12,000 journals of overall disciplines. So that's quite a big achievement. And we are ranked number 1 of all IEEE journals by Clarivat's eigenfactor. Of course, Clarivat isn't the only organization that makes metrics. It's the most popular one, but another up-and-coming one is Google Metrics, supported by Google. And if you look there, we are ranked number 3 in engineering and computer science. Google Metrics is interesting because they actually calculate the H-index of the whole journal. New authors are familiar with H-index for an author, but they can calculate H-index for the journal as a whole, and that's how they rank their journals. So that's all I really want to say, or I need to say about IEEE Access. So my next part of my talk is going to be sharing with you how you as an author can avoid common mistakes that lead to your paper being rejected. So let's show you how to prepare your paper in a way that's going to give it the best chance to pass the editor's watchful eye and the watchful eye of the reviewers. So the first big point to check your paper is in scope to begin with. So as I explained before, in scope means you're under the umbrella of the IEEE's societies. So if you've got a society name that has your topic, you are in scope. So we get a lot of papers that are just simply pure mechanical engineering, pure mathematics, pure civil engineering with no electrical engineering content whatsoever. Those papers get immediately rejected. And we get rather a lot of them. So, so just be aware of that. So that's first thing is check that. That's tip number 1. Tip 2, write a quality IEEE paper. Now this first point, originality versus novelty, is a point that confuses a lot of authors. You will notice in our IEEE Access website, we actually say we do not judge a paper on novelty. So what does that mean? It means we don't do what journals like Nature do. What Nature does is they look at your paper. If they don't think it is sufficiently novel in terms of having a wow factor, big novelty that will change the world kind of thing, the editor will reject your paper even before it goes to review. That's why people have so much trouble publishing in Nature. So we don't do that. We don't judge novelty in that regard, okay? But there is a difference between novelty and originality. So we still look for originality, which means we don't want to see a paper that has been done before, obviously, because that is not adding anything to the community. So you still have to be original in the sense that your paper is new. But we're not looking like Nature for your paper to necessarily demonstrate it's going to change the world in one paper, okay? So it's nevertheless has to be original and original piece of work and not merely incremental. So it has to have a reasonable step improvement. What constitutes a reasonable amount of improvement? That's a very interesting question. And it's something no one person can answer. It's always good as an author to have your co-authors, some of your co-authors who are experienced senior authors. Senior authors know what is a good paper when they see one. And really, it's a community decision of the editors and the reviewers if, in their opinion, your paper has made a sufficient step forward. And so that leads me to my second point, which is comparisons. In all IEEE papers, we like to see comparisons. So we like you've made your extra step, showing that you have some theory or device or methodology that is better than before. We need to then see comparisons to demonstrate that it is in fact got some kind of improvement. So comparisons with previous published approaches. So we like to see that. And we like to see validation. We like, to see some experimental results to validate theory. In some cases, like if you're doing a paper on complex systems or something like that, it's you can't exactly do a lab experiment for that, but you can do simulations and you can have other ways of validating things. So think about validation. We do now. There are some papers that are like maybe pure information theory or something like that, where you don't expect any sort of experiment, and that is fine. But, there are parts of electrical engineering where you always expect validation. For example, antennas. If you publish a new antenna, the antenna community always expects you to actually make it and characterize it and put it in your paper. Optical community, maybe not so fussy about that because optics simulators are very accurate these days. So, there's a community decision there sometimes in these things. Search for quality IEEE papers yourself. Go online, look at IEEE papers that are very highly cited and have done well, and put that side by side with your paper and see if your paper has all the elements that the good papers have. Do your own quality check, in other words. Make sure all the authors of your paper thoroughly proofread the paper before sending it in. There's nothing worse than when a paper arrives to the editor, we see all these co-authors, and there may be some junior author at the beginning and all these very distinguished senior authors in the end. And then the paper is just riddled with typing errors and mathematical formatting errors, and it's just really hard to read. And obviously no one has proofread it. And then we begin to wonder if the senior authors have even read the paper at all. And so that is obviously not a very good impression you want to give to the editor. So make sure that every author checks the paper. Run the paper through plagiarism software yourself. Now, most universities have plagiarism software these days because it's there in your university to check upon your students when they're doing their assignments and they're writing their project up or whatever. So this same software can be used to check your own paper. And it's important to do that because, you know, IEEE doesn't like it if, you know, the plagiarism software, say, detects more than 20%. And so you can check this yourself and make sure it's kept down, especially if you are doing a review paper and you have a lead author who is an inexperienced author and it might be their first time. It's surprising how much overlap with other papers that they can unwittingly put in there, and you don't want to get caught by the IEEE for that. Take it very seriously. So do check it yourself. Use our IEEE Access template that we supply online to format your paper. Don't send us any format, send us paper in our own format. And that's a tip with all journals. All journals really like you to use their own format when you submit a paper. Another thing is, it's really terrible as an editor when we receive a paper where the mathematics is terribly formatted and so hard to read. So follow the IEEE guidelines for formatting your maths properly, using all the correct spacings and rules of when to use italics and not italics in your maths, and use rules about when to use bold and not bold font in your maths and things like that. IEEE has no idea about whether you use LaTeX or Microsoft Word, but just personally speaking, as an editor, I would recommend you to use LaTeX, strongly recommend, because it's really the only tool for formatting mathematics really, really well. And so there are some common mistakes a lot of authors do that we see all the time. So basically these 4 dot points don't do these things. So don't italicize multiple letter variables and labels. Those are only for single letter variables. Don't italicize physical units and functions. Those are always not in italics. Also, don't use E notation for exponents. Use 10 to the power of something. This E notation is really for computer code, not for the journal article. And also, asterisk is really for computer code for meaning multiply. So don't use it in the journal. Use a correct multiply sign. And in many cases, if you've got 2 variables that are in italics next to each other, you don't need any multiply sign at all, because that's what italics means in maths. It means if you've got 2 of those next to each other, you multiply them. So those are my tips about formatting math. Do clear figures, label your axes clearly, use long captions to describe your figure. Talk the reader through your whole figure so the reader can understand it. Don't use fancy shading or colored backgrounds in your graphs. IEEE prefers just a white background unless you're doing something really special. I would stick to white if I were you. Don't draw a bounding box around your graph. We don't like that. It's not really an IEEE style. Use plain white backgrounds where possible. Don't have so many figures that overloads your text. If you really genuinely have a lot of graphs that you need to show the reader, you can put them in your supplementary materials section. You don't have to overload your paper if you have many. And size your figures appropriately to fit nicely in the 2-column format of IEEE. Another thing, mistake authors make is getting the references wrong and formatting them incorrectly. And remember, IEEE Access is a fast turnaround journal. We can have your paper reviewed and accepted for publication within 4 to 6 weeks. We have a very fast turnaround time. So this is another reason why the journal is very popular, because authors don't like having to wait. So because we are fast, there is actually little to no copy editing of your manuscript. And so you have to treat your manuscript almost as camera ready quality. So you need to check your references carefully. Some common mistakes are if there's an article number instead of a page number, you don't put P, you put art number for that in IEEE format. Don't miss bibliographic details, don't miss all those page numbers. A lot of authors do that. Go to the actual paper rather than the database. Always download the real paper and check it. It's amazing how many errors are propagated because there's copy and paste from the database. And the databases have lots of errors. Also, conference papers begin on page 1 usually. So if we see, 10 papers in your reference list that are conferences and all beginning on page 1, we know instantly that you just copied and pasted from a database and didn't really look at the paper. So make sure you get your conference paper page numbers correct. And if they don't have page numbers, use the DOI number, the DOI number. Minimize use of tables. Do not overload the paper with tables. Use tables very sparingly. Have a preference for graphical representations of your data. There's nothing more boring than seeing a paper with huge tables with lots of numbers. No one really wants to read that. If you really need such big tables, put them in your supplementary section. Be self-critical about your own paper. It's a good idea to have a section just before the conclusions called limitations of the study, if appropriate, and show the reader where some of the limitations are. Actually, there's some biological content in your paper. If you've got biomedical engineering, we definitely want you to put such a section in those cases. And it's appropriate for some other cases as well. Basically, get in there before the reviewers do it for you. Open questions. Any good paper should stimulate new questions, should not only be answering an old question, but stimulating new ones. And so you should be posing those in your conclusions. And if you've got a few of them, consider even having a section called open questions towards the end of the paper. Tip 9, thoroughly proofread your paper. It's a fast journal, so there's little copy editing, as I mentioned, and you need to think of your paper as almost camera ready. So take care of details. A colleague of mine, when he was visiting Cambridge a number of years ago, he noticed that they had this instruction for PhD examiners, and it said in Cambridge, because of the impracticability, not instruction for the examiners, the PhD students rather. So because of the impracticability of an examiner's establishing the details of the content of the research, the care with which the thesis is prepared will be taken as prima facie evidence of the care with which research is being carried out. So you see, it's the same with us in journal. If an author sends us a very carelessly presented paper, uh, which is hard to read, we sometimes wonder if the paper is that bad. Well, was the research carried out to that standard as well? So that's the first thing that comes in our head. So, as these people in Cambridge are imploring their PhD students, we do the same for authors. Okay, now just a general tip for all authors to be publishing successfully. Just be visible as an author. Get yourself a Scholar Google profile, be visible on Scholar Google. There's a website called Publons, which also gives each author a profile and visibility. This is a very important website because the IEEE Access database of reviewers comes from Publons. So if you're there on Publons and you're visible, you will get chosen as a reviewer. And it's always good to be a reviewer of a journal, so you get some insight, and then it helps you then as an author to write your paper better if you've been a reviewer for that same journal. Another thing is get yourself an author ID. That also gives you visibility. And it's now IEEE policy that all authors display their ORC IDs in their paper, link their ORC IDs through the IEEE login to the paper. Now, this policy, although it is official policy, it's not strictly enforced across all IEEE journals. But I think IEEE Access, we are leading the way to getting tough on that, and we are asking authors to not forget to do that. So be ahead of the game and get your ORC ID in there. And another reason why visibility is important is, if we get a paper and we're, as an editor, and the editor is a bit worried about this paper, should we publish it or not, and does a little search and can't find any of the authors anywhere, it doesn't have a good feeling. It feels, well, do these authors actually exist? Is the first thing that comes into the head of an editor. And so it then starts to give some doubts, okay? So you don't want an editor to doubt you. So be visible, make sure you're out there so you can be found. And it also act to you as an author because it means you're more likely to be chosen as a reviewer. Okay, so that's the end of my slideshow. I'm now going to throw it open for some questions. Any questions? Hello?
Yes, I request all the participants you can interact with the speaker. If you have any questions, you can unmute and speak. Sir, before that, I have one question.
Sure.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can you give just a brief description about the difference between a survey paper and a review paper?
Oh, that's a very good question. So basically, the best way to find out is actually find review papers and survey papers that are highly cited and look at them side by side yourself to get the feeling of it. So that I would recommend that. But just in terms of words, what I would say, the way I would put it, is that a review paper is reviewing topic and highlighting important parts of the topic and helping new authors in the area to kind of get a feel and an understanding of the area. So that's what I would call a review paper. Whereas a survey paper is slightly different. It's more systematic than a than a review paper. A survey paper is systematically getting many references from a particular topic and systematically surveying them and comparing results between those papers and doing comparisons. Whereas a review is more pedagogical, and a survey is more quantitative and showing the differences between papers. So might sound I was a bit hand wavy there, but it's a little hard to describe. But that's basically the essence of it. And I would recommend to dig into it by looking at review papers and survey papers side by side. Look at good ones that are highly cited. Don't look at unknown ones. And it will give you a better feel.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. And there is one question from participants. They're asking, assume if the article is rejected, if the article is rejected and resubmitted, can we add the new authors and can we change the sequence of the authors, something like that?
Okay. In principle, yes. We usually don't like author changes in IEEE, but it can be done. And what we do is you have to request from the editor a form that all the authors must sign. So we have a form for all authors to sign to prove that all authors consent to this change. So as long as the consent is officially done, it can be done. Yeah.
Okay, sir. And there is one more question.
We do it with sufferance.
And the next question is, can you please explain about the multimedia awards and discounts in IEEE Access?
Yes.
What are the best practices of preparing multimedia videos for the competition?
Okay. So just so for those of you who don't know, we encourage authors when they submit their papers to also submit a short video about their paper, a sort of introductory video, and your video goes online as supplementary material with your paper. And if you like, a video is kind of like an abstract of a visual abstract of your paper. And it is to your advantage because it can attract readers to your paper. They might see your video and think, oh, that's interesting, and then want to read it. So it can help your citations. So that's what the video is all about. And the question is, how can you receive an award for having the best video in the year? We give, I think we give more than one award for the videos. I think it's not just the best one. I think it's the second and third one, something like that. I forget the details, but yes, it's very difficult to judge. It's like being a film critic. So, just my advice is just to look at videos that are already there on IEEE Access papers and decide for yourself. Have a sample and say, think to yourself, oh, that one was really engaging. It explained to me what the paper was about, the essence of it, and it was really interesting and kept me hooked. That was a good video. If you then watched a video and you didn't know what was going on and it was boring, that's a bad video. So my advice is look at a few, and that's the best way to learn what is a good one.
Okay. And the next question is IEEE Access is an SCI Science Citation Index, and is there any article processing charges?
Okay, is it SCI index? It is. It's indexed by all the major indexing organizations. So the answer is yes to all of those. what was the next question? Was about discounts, correct?
No. Is there any article processing charges?
Oh, yes, I mentioned that in one of my first slides. It is
Yeah.
1,750 US is the article processing charge.
Okay. Uh,
So I don't know what the traditions are in Indian universities for coping with those charges, but in some other countries, authors are expected to get those charges from, say, the research grants. In some countries, and India can do this as well if it wants to, the university itself develops an agreement with publishing companies where they have a general university-wide agreement with the publisher that all their authors can publish in their open access with no extra charge. And in return, the university pays some flat fee to the publisher. And then any
okay.
author can, from that university, publish in open access. So these are what are called institutional agreements. So if your
Okay.
university does not have an institutional agreement, you can, and you know the people in power in your university, you can encourage them to do that. Otherwise, I think the money comes from research funds usually.
Okay. Okay. And I think there is one participant wants to know can we include interviews with others and views on them in the multimedia? I think.
To have an interview, there's nothing wrong with that, provided it's on topic. Sure.
Okay. What is the acceptance ratio in IEEE Access?
Okay, acceptance is around 30% and rejection 70%. When I say rejection, is like final rejection. After, because I said we reject all the papers even for minor corrections, and then you resubmit. But then the paper can be rejected in a major way, where we reject and say, okay, send it back again, please. That's the final rejection.
Okay. Okay.
That's about 70%.
Okay.
So if your authors kind of do all the things that I've suggested in my slides, that hopefully will bias you to be in the 30% group rather than the 70% group.
Okay. And there are so many requests from the participants. They are asking for your slides for reference, your PowerPoint presentation. If it is possible, you can share with me so that I can share with them.
Actually, I put these slides with a little bit of a voiceover on YouTube. So I will send you a YouTube link.
Yeah, sure, sir. Sure. May I request Mr. Viswanath? Viswanath, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Viswanathan?
Sir, yes, sir.
So I think, sir, today we are very fortunate to get the tips from you. Particularly, we could able to understand the difference between originality and novelty. And you also defined the wide scope. For that matter, many of us, we usually get the out of scope reply from most of the journals like Nature and everyone. And particularly, you stressed on formatting, in particular, mathematical equations can be more precisely. We can do it using latex tools.
Yes.
And of course, a very good beautification of the paper, how the paper should look like, and all these tips you have given excellently well, sir. I think all the participants are very much gained a lot of knowledge. And there is one question: open source softwares are accepted in the publication of papers in IEEE Access. Is that
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
open source softwares are accepted in the publication of IEEE Access? I think his question is like
Yes.
this. He
Yes,
might have used the open source software to get some results. So those results can be published in IEEE Access.
Provided the results are new, sure, and you reference where you got the software from in the paper, so it's transparent, this would be fine.
Yeah.
Another thing you can do is if you have made your own software to find a result in your paper, this software can be put online with your paper. It can go online. So you can choose to make your software openly available. And some authors like to do that. If they have some nice software that is producing a useful tool for people, and it's in their paper, they put it online with their paper, and this has added benefit that it can increase the citation rate of your paper. Because if that software tool becomes popular and people use it, then when they write their paper, they have to cite your paper to say where the software came from. And so this will increase your citation rate. That's the idea.
Okay.